Coming into this left-hander, a little bit of brake, into second, tip it in. It just feels so good and so stable through there. Oh. Little bit of a wheelie off the limiter. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Ducati's Multistrada V4S. I've had this bike for exactly a week and it goes back in about 45 minutes time. Unfortunately, I had the past couple of days down to film a proper review on it, but it has been raining non-stop. Hopefully you've seen my recent Multistrada V2S review. I actually had that bike directly before this one, so I got a real back-to-back comparison. What are the headline facts and figures? So the base price for a V4S in the UK is £21,500. So it's about £5,000 more than the V2S. And I guess in today's video we're going to talk about whether or not I think it is worth that extra £5,000. It has an 1158cc V4, so 4 cylinders as opposed to the 2 cylinders on the V2S. That's what the 2 and the 4 stand for. The S essentially stands for adaptive electronic suspension. So we have a Marzocchi adjustable fork on the front end, and I'm not sure what we have on the rear end. It's also fully adjustable, so you can play around with the suspension settings depending on whether you have just the rider on, like we have at the moment, or the rider and full luggage, 2 riders and no luggage, or 2 riders and full luggage. You also have a number of different riding modes that we'll talk about once we get it out on the road. That bigger 1158cc engine produces 170 horsepower at 10,750 RPM, so almost 11,000 RPM. It also produces 124 newton meters of torque at 9,000 RPM. It weighs a quoted 231 kilos wet, although Ducati's wet weight doesn't include fuel. This has a 22 litre tank, so if you'd have put 22 litres of fuel in there, that would equate for about 15-16 kilos, and therefore bring its overall weight up to about 246 or 247 kilos, which actually makes it heavier than BMW's R1300 GS, because that weight is quoted wet, but it's quoted with fuel. So just bear that in mind. But we're only talking, 5 or 6 kilos difference. I think it's worth showing you the luggage system because it's very handy. It works very well. Obviously, we've got both bags on. The one on the right is a lot smaller because it has to fit around the exhaust. It has a nice heat shield there. The one on the left is bigger. It also has a floating system. I didn't talk about this on the V2S. It moves from left to right. I thought that was broken when I first discovered it, but it's actually to assist with crosswinds. So you want all the help you can get, especially with big luggage, and that apparently alleviates some of the crosswinds. To take these bags off, it's very easy. So you just put your key in there, lift this up. There's a pull thing there. If you pull that up, it releases the bag and it comes away like so. Easy peasy. And putting it back on is just as easy. There you go, push that down and away you go. Now that is locked and that is not coming off. If you want to open the bags, you do the same thing, put the key in, but you push this, lift this open. There you go. There's a bit of a securing strap in there as well. Make sure you got that right and pull that out. Probably a good time to talk about the fact that this is a keyless start, so the key can go in your pocket. Make sure you zip it up, although that is one thing I really liked about the V2S, was the fact you put the key in because you knew where the key was all the time. Now if we press that button there, it's not the nicest button in the world, but the good news is the rest of what we're greeted here in the cockpit is of a higher quality than the V2S. V2S was very plasticky around here, and this definitely isn't. It's more premium looking. In fact, it looks totally different. We'll just throw my leg over and jump on and have a quick look here. So we have a different display. I'm not sure if this is like a standalone product or if this is one that's being phased out. I think I prefer the one on the V2S overall, just gets less glare, but it's adjustable. You can adjust it at different angles depending on how tall the rider is, as is the screen, just like it was on the V2S. We have these wonderful side mirrors, which I banged on about in the V2S. The reason they're wonderful is they actually work, and when I'm using them I can barely see any of my shoulder, which sounds like a small thing, but on a motorbike it's a big thing. A lot of side mirrors don't show you that. They've also got blind spot detectors, etc. This bike is fully loaded with a lot of safety devices. In fact, you can see on there, forward collision warning. It has adaptive cruise control. The suspension modes, so if you press that, you go over here, we can actually see what I was talking about. I have it set as rider and baggage, although the baggage doesn't have anything in it, only because I'm quite heavy and I prefer the way the bike feels when I've got the rear end a little bit stiffer. But if I knock it back into rider, then it softens the rear end, or if I have it in 2-passenger or 2-passenger and baggage, then it's obviously as stiff and pushed up as possible on the rear end. We also have an auto leveling feature there, but let's just put it back to rider and baggage. Amongst that we have the rider mode. So again, I think if we press the mode button down here, we have a number of different riding modes. Let me just get that right. So we have touring, enduro, urban, wet and sport. And as the settings suggest, it's kind of what you get. I've been riding mostly around in sport because although it is a bit stiffer than, let's say, touring, it's still a really good ride quality on this bike. The suspension feels great, just as it did on the V2S. So I was kind of expecting it to feel really, really good. The rest of it's all very self-explanatory. We've got the kill switch here, starter button. I think that's the lights there. We've got a heated grip button, which is a bonus. You didn't get that button on the V2S. You had to go through menus, which to me is just too much faff. And over here we have things like cruise control, the horn, we have the flashing lights up here, hazard lights over there, and this toggle here which kind of navigates you through the menu system. Got my gloves on. First thing to do is press the ignition, make sure the kill switch is off, pull the clutch in just in case I'm not in neutral, and press the starter button here. There we go. I am in neutral, but we're going to go into first gear, make sure there's nothing coming, and pull out of here. First thing to talk about is how much nicer the clutch feels, and although I think it's the same clutch unit, at least it's the same lever and reservoir up here on the bar, it's either calibrated much better or it just seems to work better with the V4, because that's one small complaint I had with the V2S, was the clutch was right at the end of the stroke essentially, and yeah, I just couldn't get used to it, whereas this one just feels wonderful. First thing to talk about is riding position. Now, although it's not radically different to the V2S, it definitely gives me a little bit more legroom, which is a good thing for taller riders. I'm 193 for those of you that haven't watched my content before. So in terms of a motorcyclist, I am on the lankier side and I do struggle with a lot of sports bikes, but this feels great. It also feels a little bit longer in the cockpit, which again for me is a good thing. The screen and sort of front end ergonomics are completely different on this bike to what they are on the V2S. The V2S seems to have a much steeper screen, and it just all looks a lot different. And with the short time that I've spent behind this bike, I genuinely think that the V2S actually shields you from the wind better. Once again, I'm talking for someone of my height. Maybe if you're a little bit lower, as soon as I get down there, I'm completely out of the wind. But sitting up here, I feel like I'm right in the in the wind. Maybe putting this down probably doesn't make it any worse. But I am going to lift it up because I think it will help a little bit with the mic on this particular video. Everything else feels relatively familiar, although the controls are all very different. We've just been through them, and the V2S has a completely different sort of left control system. I prefer the controls on this. They definitely look more substantial and like they're going to last a lot longer than the ones on the V2S. And I think that goes for a lot of this bike, the fit and finish, all that plastic area around the cockpit that I complained a little bit about on the V2S. Well, this bike doesn't have that, and it just seems to be screwed together a little bit better. There's no exposed wiring, or less exposed wiring than there was on the V2S. The adaptive cruise control does work relatively well, but occasionally it will just pick up something that it thinks is maybe a car in front, or if you go through a bend a little bit quicker than the bike likes, like just there, it then shuts the adaptive cruise off. It seems to be overly sensitive, and I'm not a big fan of adaptive cruise on cars and seemingly on bikes either. I want my cruise control to be cruise control. If I set it to 50 miles an hour, I just want it to sit at 50 miles an hour. It should be up to me to slow things down or speed things up, because it then keeps me on the ball and aware of what's going on, rather than switching completely off, which I think, especially in some of the semi-autonomous cars and their crazy systems they've got these days, well, you can set them and almost fall asleep at the wheel, and I don't think that is a good thing. And although this is just a basic cruise control or adaptive cruise, I do wish that it wasn't that and it was a standard cruise control. I love the standard cruise control on the V2S. I love the one on my F900 GS. Ride quality, well, we briefly talked about that before we jumped on the bike, and I have to say, even in sport on a UK road, it is wonderful. When you knock it back into touring, everything just feels so much better again. It is lovely, really, really is. I could spend a lot of time on this bike touring, as the mode suggests, through the UK, through the rest of Europe, wherever I like. It feels brilliant, really, really comfortable. I couldn't tell you if it's better than, let's say, BMW's R1300 GS, because I haven't spent much time on that bike, and the little time I have spent on that bike was about 18 months ago, and I really can't remember it because it was only a couple of hours. But you'd struggle to get a better ride than this, and a better, more comfortable seat. It is lovely. While we're talking about seats, we have a heated rider seat, and this one has a heated pillion seat as well for your passenger at the back, and even they have two different heating modes, and they can regulate that on the fly. There's a button that's on the seat that they can operate whilst we're moving along, so that's really, really handy. And once again, demonstrating, showing you that this bike is serious, and once again demonstrating and showing you that this bike is a serious bit of kit when it comes to touring and comfort. Something else that backs that theory up is this bike's 22 litre fuel tank. Now, I have no experience with older Multistradas, but I have watched videos and read articles about the fact that they've always suffered in terms of overall range, because, well, the engine is pretty thirsty and the tank was always a bit small compared to BMW's equivalent. But this time, well, this is 3 litres bigger than the R1300 GS. It's not as big as the 1300 Adventure, which is 30 odd litres, but that's a whole nother level and sort of purpose bike, if you like. Something else to help with that fuel efficiency is the fact that this bike's engine actually shuts down a bank of cylinders when you're not labouring it. So when you're really small throttle inputs or cruising along, probably like we are now, if I put it into 6th gear, 50 miles an hour, you can actually feel the difference in vibration, and at slower speeds you can hear the difference in engine note when the bank of cylinders shut down. So it goes to 2 cylinders essentially, a bit like Audi's V8 in the RS6. That goes down to a 4-cylinder when you're not pushing it hard. And it is interesting that, well, they're both kind of the same parent company, so I wonder if they share technologies. What you're probably waiting to hear is what it's like when you start pushing on, because after all, This is a V4S with 170 horsepower. So let's just check the wing mirrors. There's nothing behind us. Shut that throttle. Let's bring it into sport. There we go. Make sure we select that. Bring it back there. I can feel everything is stiffer. Also, the throttle response feels a little bit better. Once again, this has got a brilliant throttle. I think it's the same as the V2S. Maybe it's the same unit that's on all Ducatis, but they definitely beat BMW in terms of throttle feeling. Really good. And I wonder how much of that they've learnt through MotoGP and World Superbikes, because with those guys, it's all about throttle feel, and even when you're in sport, it doesn't feel too jerky, and that translates to when you're on track on a really fast bike like that Street Fighter V4S. And it's just really nice. You're second gear hairpin, you pick the throttle up, and it's not too aggressive. It's just lovely, the pickup. Anyway, let's change down into second gear and try and experience some of that torque and power. Holy moly! Wow. Oh, it's just brilliant. And thankfully, not only is it ridiculously fast, but it slows down and handles just as well. It's a complete package, it really is. To me, as a complete novice, it feels very much like a sports bike on stilts. If I was to compare this to a car, it would be an Audi RS Q8 Performance. A car that I absolutely love, and a car that shouldn't do things that it does, because it's a massive 2.5 ton SUV, but yet it will go around a racetrack at the same pace as an RS3. Doesn't make any sense, and that's exactly what this feels like. Coming into this left-hander, a little bit of brake, into second, tip it in, it just feels so good and so stable through there. Oh. Little bit of a wheelie off the limiter. Wow, what a machine! What a machine! But you don't have to ride it like that. You can knock it back into 6th gear and it just cruises along. It's not that smooth below, let's say, 3,500 RPM, and I did discover that recently on the XDiavel. Is this bike worth £5,000 more than the V2S Multistrada? That is the $1 million question. And I would have to say, unless you're my sort of height or taller, I would argue that it's not worth that extra £5,000. And I'm not saying it isn't a brilliant bike, because it is. And I can see where that extra £5,000 has gone, 100%. But the V2S, apart from that shoddy sort of plastic setup around here, is a brilliant bike and package. And with 115 horsepower, which is 55 less than this, well, it's definitely quick enough as a road bike, as a touring bike. Once you load both bikes up, so let's say 2 passengers and a load of luggage, that's when this bike, I'm sure, would make more sense, because you've got a little bit more room, you've got a little bit more luxury, and you've got a chunk more power and torque. And I think that really would make a difference on a long touring trip. It also might be more efficient on longer runs. I don't know, don't quote me on that. Might be people laughing at me right now when I say that, because I'm comparing a bigger V4 engine to a smaller V2. But with all of that extra technology, and also the fact that I'm sure in 6th gear, which is top gear on the majority of motorbikes, this seems to rev a lot lower in 6th gear than the V2S, but maybe I've made that up. So we're at 60 miles an hour here, and we're sitting about 3,800 RPM, which is really chill, especially on a motorbike. So therefore it's not drinking much fuel, it's probably using that cylinder deactivation technology. So like with many things in many car reviews, the bigger, more expensive sibling is always worth the money, well, most of the time, if you can afford and justify it. If you've got that extra £5,000 or that extra monthly figure, whatever it might be, then sure, this is a better bike. It's faster, that V4 engine is an absolute peach, and I've really enjoyed my time with this bike. I'll try and get it again maybe later this summer or next year, because I'm just rapidly running out of time. I've got so much going on at the moment, which is a good thing, but I just wish I could go out and enjoy the motorbike a little bit more. The motorbikes, my motorbike that I'm about to go and pick up. Oh, that clutch is just gorgeous. Oh, it's just wonderful. I wish I had that clutch on my bike. It's so nice. Really, really nice. Yeah, I like this bike a lot. But if I was comparing it to the V2S, then I would say that the V2S is probably better value overall. But yeah, if you can afford one of these, very nice. Very, very nice. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful bit of kit. Don't know what's going on here. It's all building works at Silverstone as I drop this back to the wonderful girls and guys at Ducati UK. Yeah, it's a shame I haven't got to spend more time on this bike, but as I said at the start, thanks to the MotoGP that was here only a few days ago, and the weather, which as you can see might change again today, I just didn't get to spend the amount of time on it that I wish I had. But in the short time that I have spent on it, I've been very, very convinced. It's a wonderful bit of kit. And yet another really, really good and compelling Ducati. There we go. Ducati UK. Wonderful. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and stay tuned for another one coming very, very soon. Cheers.